Hi everybody, my name's Dave and thanks for joining me. And today I want to talk a little bit about something I deal with about 5 times a day when I'm at work. Auxiliary battery systems, what to buy, how to fit, what to fit, and why. So I'm going to be looking at the screen to do a bit of reading, so I might not always be looking at the camera. So auxiliary battery systems, now I know I've talked about these before, but I wanted to go into it a little bit more, as if I'm going to sell one of these to you. So at work every day I spend around 2 hours explaining auxiliary battery systems to people who do not know how it all relates to each other. As part of those chats I always discuss batteries, and I often compare AGM to lithium batteries. I also look at solar panels. I look at controllers, I look at the pros and cons of these. So I thought I would make a video explaining the conversations that we have and how I settle their concerns. I am an honest person. I would not rip anybody off. I don't want anybody to think that I am a salesman of some sort that would rip somebody off. That is not the case. So what's the first thing that we do? Well, the first thing that I do is I determine what they already have. So the very first question I ask is, when I'm asked about a second battery, is, what do you have already? The answer I normally get back is either I have a battery and some cables, or I have nothing at all. I don't have anything. And in this case, I'll assume they've got a battery and some cables. So I say to them, well, what type of battery do you have? The answer to this question varies from I'm not sure through to the battery type and size. So they're usually around about 110 ampere hour AGM, but occasionally we get people who've already got lithium. I'll say to them, how do you know it's an AGM? Is it heavy? Well, of course, if you ask a woman if a battery is heavy, she's going to say it's heavy if it's lithium, because they are heavy. If you compare them to a pack of cards or a Big Mac or something like that, they're pretty heavy. But they're nowhere near as heavy as an AGM. So if they have never seen an AGM, how do they know if it's not heavy or not? So I usually take them to two batteries and say, well, you lift that one and then lift this one and tell me which one you have. And it's usually the AGM. So that just really clarifies what people have. I say, well, what type of cables do you have? What type of cables are you running? And the answer here is usually a voltage sensitive relay or a smart isolator. Sometimes it's a DC to DC charger. However, mostly they have not much at all. So what's next? Well, once I've determined what they have, if they have anything at all, I then determine what it is they're trying to do, what they're trying to achieve. This can be from a fully fledged dual battery camping setup to a real basic setup. And I often hear, I want to run a fridge, but I'm only ever going to go for a couple of days and it won't be more than that. Well, the key is that most people are different and they have different setup requirements as well as a vast array of different cars. However, the vast majority have one thing in common. They want to power a fridge. I'll explain this to you here at this point. Flooded lead acid battery you have in your battery bay, in your engine bay, is not designed to power equipment. It's designed to give a lot of power all at once and then charge up quickly and be done. So they're not used to giving out small amounts of power and charging up slowly. That's the job of a deep cycle battery. So an AGM battery. AGM stands for adsorbed glass mat. And basically you have lead plates with acid and the acid is absorbed into the glass mat between the plates. So you don't get a lot of slopping around and things like that. AGM batteries generally can't be used under the bonnet unless they have access to the lead plates and acid, so that you can top them up with distilled water, whatever it is you put in them. The heat under the bonnet will cause the battery to vent all its acid away, and then you won't be able to top it up again. It'll be ruined. So that's no good either. And you can't put a lithium battery under a bonnet, because a lithium battery cannot stand the heat, cannot stand the cold, and I will talk a little bit more about lithium batteries in a minute. So I explained to them that they've got three basic choices. They can have any Deac Cycle battery, charge it at home, take it with them and power the fridge. Now the pros of that are it's simple and easy to maintain. It's easy to set up. It's the cheapest option because you only need a battery and a fridge. And it's lighter because you don't have all the extra stuff to go with it, especially with lithium. The cons? Well, once the battery is discharged, they've got no power. That's it until they take it home and charge it again. They have no other method of powering the fridge. The more they use the fridge, the quicker the battery will discharge. Those are the cons. Okay. So at this point, I quite often get asked, well, how do I charge my battery when I'm camping? I say to them, well, what you can do, it's the simplest and easiest method is you can have the same as the above, but have a solar blanket or a panel and top up the battery once they reach their camp. You know, you throw your panel out on the ground and then it's in the sun and it's charging the battery. So the pros of that is they can keep their battery charged and run fairly indefinitely as long as they're not using more power than they can put in. It's still fairly simple and easy to maintain, and it's still reasonably cheap. It's a little bit more expensive, but it's reasonably cheap. Cons. Solar doesn't work at night. Oh, nor does it work very good on dull days. That's mainly the cons. There are one or two others that I can't quite think of at this moment, but we maybe discuss them if I remember them. Alright, so what is the third option? The third option is the same as options 1 and the same as options 2, only they fit a DC to DC charger and get power from the alternator and solar, and it keeps the batteries charged. So what are the pros for this? Well, they can charge both solar and from the alternator at the same time. They have the option to run the engine when the solar is not viable, i.e. at night. Batteries charge any time the engine is running, and they have solar priority charging. And the cons, this is a little bit more complicated setup, requires more wires and can be a bit more expensive. There are other variables that need to be discussed, such as battery types and when to use fixed solar panels or flexible blankets as panels or whatever. Okay, but before we discuss that, let's talk about voltage drop. Now, many people you see them glazing over when you talk about voltage drop, but it's a very real thing and it's very relevant to what we're trying to do here. We're trying to charge a battery in the back of a car, which is at some distance from the battery in the front of the car and the alternator. So voltage drop is a real thing. And voltage drop occurs when the voltage at the end of a run of a cable is lower than it is at the beginning. So when you connect it to your battery, it might be, say, 13.1 volts. By the time it gets to the end of the cable, it's at 12.1 volts. It's lost a volt. Okay. So to decrease the voltage drop in a circuit, you need to increase the size of your wire, your cross section of your wire. This is done to lower the overall resistance of the cable length. So what happens is, over a shorter cable, you get more resistance. So you get voltage drop. So you increase the size of the cable and it reduces the voltage drop. You've got to think of this like water going through a pipe. So if you push water through a pipe and it's going through quite nicely, it's going really well, it's dribbling out the end as fast as it's going in this end, and then somebody turns up the tap so it's faster, but the water can't get through the pipe quick enough. So that's called resistance, because it resists the flow of water. Okay, it's the same with electricity. So how do you fix that? You put on a bigger hose and it lets more water through. That's the same with electricity. It's exactly the same. And that's what voltage drop is. So if you use a small cable and you're trying to get too much voltage down it, by the time it gets to the end, it will reduce the voltage considerably, and it may be to the point where it doesn't work anymore. So it is a real thing. Right, so that's voltage drop. Okay, so battery types. Okay, there are other options, but generally the choice is between AGM, which is absorbed glass mat, and lithium LiFePO4, which is lithium ferrous phosphate, or lithium iron phosphate. Each battery type has its own pros and cons as follows. The AGM, or the absorbed glass mat, means that they are a lead acid battery that has a glass mat between each lead electrodes that soaks up an acid and stops it slopping around. The pros are it's cheap to purchase and can usually be charged from any charger. Cons are very heavy. They can be discharged to 0% but not really useful under 50% capacity. This is also significantly reduces the battery's lifespan if you go down to 0. So 50% of an AGM battery is usually about 12 volts, 11.5 to 12 volts. So you try powering a fridge with a 12 volt battery at 12 volts and you probably won't get anywhere. And also there's no temperature control. So if you're overheating an AGM battery to a point where it'll explode, so be it, because you can't tell until it blows up. Right. The facts. The lifespan of an AGM battery is anywhere between 500 and 1200 cycles, depending on your discharge rates. So a cycle is a full battery drained down to a certain point and then charged back up to full again. That is one cycle. Okay, now if you take your battery down to 50% and then charge it back up again, that's fine. Your battery will last something in the region of 500 to 1200 cycles, nearer the 1200 end. Okay, if you take your battery down to 30%, then you're likely going to last somewhere between 500 and sort of 700 cycles. And if you take it down to 0 every time, you're going to last less than 500, well, maybe 300 to 500 cycles. Now you're getting a bit ridiculously short. So let's move on to the lithium LiFePO4 or lithium iron phosphate battery. So what are the pros for a lithium iron phosphate battery? Well, they're lightweight. They can produce about 85% of their capacity. They contain a battery management system that monitors the battery. And they're non-flammable. They do not burn. They do not have thermal runaway. They're also temperature and voltage controlled. Cons against a LiFePO battery is they're expensive. What they need versus what I recommend. At this point we discuss budgets, and for the purpose of this exercise, budgets are unlimited. I always say that people should buy what they can afford and get the best equipment that they can afford. My advice to them is not to buy something now that they would need to replace later. This just means you're buying twice. However, this is not always feasible and people cannot always afford what they need. At this stage, I always suggest that they buy certain items and leave others till they can afford it. So what I would recommend is a lithium LiFePO4 battery at least 100 ampere hours. The best DC-DC charger you can afford, but hopefully with a minimum of 40 amps. The highest capacity solar panel they can afford. Really at least 160 watts. So why? Well, lithium batteries are a lot lighter than AGM, which helps with the GVM of your car. They also provide a much better capacity. Lithium batteries also have a much longer life, and LiFePO4 is way safer than AGM. There is no more flammable cells, thermal runaway. No, that is all a thing of the past. It's Tesla cars. Forget that. LiFePO4 batteries are safe. They are also a lot more expensive to purchase. For example, our 120-hour lithium battery is retailing at $479 today, where our 98 ampere hour and 115 ampere hour AGM batteries are at $179 and $199 respectively. Purchasing an AGM battery is a false economy because you will return and buy a lithium battery at a later date. I currently use two 120 ampere hour lithium batteries. Alright, so DC to DC chargers are a bit of a minefield purchase choice. There are so many on the market and hugely different prices. I would recommend at least a 40 amp charger, because whilst 25 amp is adequate, it's only a matter of time when you need more. If you buy a 25 amp, it won't be long before you're back buying a 40 amp. And the reason is that you never reduce what you're going to do, you always increase it. At work at the moment, the cost of a 25 amp per hour DC to DC charger is $178. For the 40 amp, $268. DC to DC chargers should come with a couple of features, such as the ability to deal with smart alternators. It should also have an inbuilt MPPT solar controller. Personally, I use a Renogy DCC50S 50 amp charger with MPPT solar. Solar panels are a little different. Now, I always ask how they will be used. I always tell the customer, if you mount a rigid panel on the roof and you need to park your car in the sun. Whereas if you have a blanket or a folding panel, you can park the car in the shade and place the panel in the sun. Now, for most families, the latter is the better option. But for most young men, the former is their choice because that's what their friends have done. And there is no accounting for stupidity. 200 watt solar blankets cost $178.95 with a free 6 meter cable today. I use two of them, two 200 watt solar blankets. So if you buy 3 things now, you'll have everything you need for a long and successful camping setup. So the ideal setup is 120 amp hour lithium battery or greater, a battery box, a 40 amp DC to DC charger with MPPT solar, 8 gauge standard wire gauge cable from the crank battery to the DC charger, and the solar blanket and extension cable plugged into the DC to DC charger. That's all you need to get going. So this is a discussion we have several times a day. Sometimes people buy the whole lot, like today a person bought all of that stuff. They will go away and they'll have a setup that's good for a good few years. Whereas anybody who buys AGM, because they can't afford a lithium, is silly. What they should do is save their money, go and buy the lithium later. The cost of lithium won't go down. It's probably settled at the price it's going to stay at. But buying a lithium battery is a no-brainer if you think about it. Buying an AGM battery because you can't afford a lithium is false economy in my book. Save your money, go away and come back when you can afford it. Because you don't want to be buying twice. If you get a battery for $479, you don't want to be paying $679. But that's what you do if you buy an AGM. Anyway, that's the conversation we have. It usually results in favourable all-round results. If you have any questions, please ask them in the comments. Otherwise, I'll see you on the next video. Thank you.